Oh man, was I excited for this one. What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to be covering Alien Romulus, which was directed by Fede Alvarez. Now, a quick time frame of this movie is that it's set in between Ridley Scott's Alien and James Cameron's Aliens. And because of the association with those two master filmmakers, Fede Alvarez had a huge task when having to come up with a worthy entry in a franchise that, despite the later entries being weaker movies, those first two are just so iconic. But then again, we're talking about the guy that directed the remake for Evil Dead and the polarizing Don't Breathe, which personally I really loved that movie. So I had all the confidence in the world that he was going to make a kick-ass film, especially considering that Ridley Scott came back as a producer in this movie, so even though he didn't direct it, he definitely had a huge role when it came to having some form of input. For starters, it was immersive to say the least. Fede Alvarez really was able to capture and let you feel how overwhelming the grandness of the scope of his vision for the film was, but in like the best way possible. He perfectly blended tight, small, cramped areas with close quarters tension with large scale movements in other scenes. I was just in awe when we saw the shots in space where we left orbit, and it was like these wide angle panoramic shots. It all just looked so gorgeous. And the atmosphere, it was just so cold and isolating, and you'd think in a space movie that'd be something that would be a no-brainer and easy to replicate, but surprisingly few movies actually get it right, and Romulus did that correctly. And with how little amount of time spent in the beginning of the movie in the colony, it made me so curious to see how these people actually lived and what it was like to be in those colonies. Despite this being an extremely similar plot to the original Alien, I really liked that instead of it being scientists or adults, it's just a ragtag group of kids who, because of their precocious nature, thought, hey, let's steal from the company and hope that there's gonna be no consequences. Yet you root for them because of the little bit of insight that we get. This is kind of like their only chance. Hell, Rain, who's the main protagonist, tries to go by the books, and when she meets the hours required for a travel permit, still gets unfairly denied. Another high point for me was that the aesthetic was matched perfectly with that futuristic look that was established from the beginning of the franchise, and obviously the effects are majorly updated, but the aesthetic was still intact and felt extremely faithful to the look of the original. But honestly, one of my favorite things about this movie, and huge props to Fede Alvarez, is mainly that while it is able to work off of the original source material, mainly the first two films, I loved when it allowed itself to be its own thing. And when it comes to the cast, David Johnson really stole the show in delivering such a captivating and powerful performance with Andy's character. It's no new knowledge that the Alien franchise has talked about deeper themes. For example, Alien 2 really being a metaphor about maternal ties to its offspring and how much a mother is willing to go for its child. So I loved that Andy's character really was not only a central character for the narrative, but also represented and was the physical embodiment of humanity and the value of a soul. There were so many times where the characters disregarded the synthetics as just basically being equipment or being expendable. And I don't know, I just found that so ironic because honestly, Andy was the most human out of all the characters. One of my favorite lines in the movie is when one of the characters is talking about synthetics and says he's not real, and yet most of the actions taken by the other characters who are humans are very selfish. So I really appreciated that the movie used nuance in a powerful way. But also the contrasting versions of Andy, like hats off to Johnson for playing the role so well. Andy's loving, softened version was so endearing and cute and helpful, and he just had a warm nature to help. But then the other version of him is this rigid, apathetic man that's intensely pragmatic and only does what's best for the survival of the group. It's no surprise that Sigourney Weaver left gigantic shoes to fill, but I honestly felt that Kaylee Spaney really stepped up and gave a very solid, strong performance that would have made Ripley very proud. She's a survivalist and fighter like you'd expect from a femme fatale, but I liked that she never felt overpowered, like she had to be put in situations that really made her think on her feet to come up with ways to overcome obstacles. My favorite being the zero gravity stun with floating acid. I thought that was sick, but in general she was always on her guard, and it made it for a better experience, because while it's cool to see the final girl just obliterate obliterate anything in her path, I find it more engaging when the character has to fight tooth and nail to make it to the next obstacle. Similarly to his 2013 remake of Evil Dead, Romulus understood the title and series it's in, and yet was able to fully create its own identity without ever feeling like it's disingenuous. Here, Romulus understands what it takes to make a great alien movie, and it masterfully executes all those bits with its own style. And along with new ideas, there's a lot of fun sequences that I really enjoyed. One of my favorites is when they have to cross a room of facehuggers with temperature and sound playing huge factors. And much like the 2009 Friday the 13th reboot, this film was able to pull the better parts of certain entries in the franchise and use them to their maximum potential to bring you back into the overall series. I think it does a great job at pulling the horror cold tone of Ridley Scott's original Alien and blended it lovingly well with Cameron's larger scoped action-y tone of the sequel. I also felt that they did an amazing job with the xenomorphs and facehuggers. They were scary, and the effects as they moved in different directions just looked so clean, and just really a great job on the special effects. I'm also massively glad that we finally learned that it's not necessary to have a legacy character in a movie that's already part of an already existing franchise. And that's not to say that it can't work, it's just if a franchise can't make a movie without a pre-existing character, then that franchise is in dire need of something new. I'm of the opinion that a franchise should be able to move forward solely based off of its own ideas and concepts. And I'm really impressed with a franchise as dense as Alien is. There was only really 2 moments of exposition dumping that weren't long enough to really slow down the pacing, which, by the way, the pacing here is fantastic. In general, the runtime is 2 hours long, but it honestly flew by. The movie's writing was smart enough to be able to write in a lot of fan service, but not knowing it doesn't really harm the narrative of the film. There were only a few things that I didn't really like about the movie, like outside of Andy and Rain, the other characters I didn't really care for. They were largely forgettable. One of the characters has a farm backstory that I think the movie's trying to pull at your heartstrings for, but at that point, this character is just so insufferable that he's become irredeemable by that point. And yeah, Rook's face looked really horrific. Like, it was bad CGI to the point that it honestly at times looked scarier than some of the actual creatures. And personally, I can't understand the character decision of Kay when she injects herself with the experimental bioweapon. Like, I get it, you're unsure of your future, but I don't know what possessed her to make that call. Like, first off, you weren't in the room when Rook was trying to sell the idea of this bioweapon to the other group of creating the perfect organism. And on top of that, one of your trusted friends had stopped an earlier attempt at injecting you with it. So I just felt like it was a really poor decision. Also, while I do really like Rain's character, I found it a bit frustrating that it took her to go through this whole ordeal to realize, hey, Andy's objective should be to do what's best for both of us, not just to do what's best for me. It would make sense if this was her learning arc and we're shown from the beginning that she doesn't really have this much affection for him. But we're told right from the start how much she values him as a brother despite being a synthetic. Yet she never considered if she really loved him, he shouldn't just live for her. Again, just really neatly tying into that whole theme of humanity and selflessness versus selfishness. But those are just small nitpicks. Overall, I think it's a great film, and I'd say my favorite way to look at it is if this was a video game, this is one of those side missions that ends up being way more entertaining than the actual main storyline mission, because I definitely don't think it harms or really affects the overall story, yet it's better than all of the other entries outside of the first 2. But those are just my thoughts. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe. My name's Anthony, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.